What a treat it was this evening listening to Professor Bhargav. And as I said, there is no one better than him to speak on Indian secularism. He is an eternal optimist. And therefore, with all which we have experienced in recent past, he feels that we can do something to revive back legitimacy of secularism. Of all the examples he has picked up, while I am largely in agreement, and I concede the point that the secularists somewhere lost the direction. But I have a feeling, I'm not saying this at all, that Professor Bhargav in any way undermines the importance of secularism. The way he has articulated the constitutional secularism is the correct constitutional position. Yet I would like to say a few things. When we are mentioning problems with our secularism, what we are largely talking about, and we are talking about 1986 unlocking of Babri Mosque, and then the 1986 overturning of Shah Bano judgment, and then satanic versus ban. Now, I really don't know, but somewhere on these 3 points, which are said to be the time when foundations of aggressive Hindutva were laid, we lost chronology, so to say. And if we go by chronology, this 1986 unlocking decision, if one minutely does month to month, day to day chronology, will probably come first. It was in 85 June that a resolution was passed by the Hindutva groups that by next year's this date in March, we must get this locks broken. There was a movement, they said, right now we are saying unlock it. If you don't unlock it, there will be a break the lock movement. And Rajiv Gandhi conceded to them and promised them it will be done. Therefore, it was first appeasement of the Hindutva forces and then the appeasement of the Muslim forces that in February he promised that I will undo the Shah Bano judgment. Now, about the Shah Bano judgment also, I think so much has been written. There is not a single writing which has said that it was a turning point on Indian secularism. But two things we have forgotten. One, that Shah Bano judgment was not about personal laws. It was a case about Code of Criminal Procedure. Some was seeking maintenance under Code of Criminal Procedure, which is the general law of the land. I think Justice Chandrachud unnecessarily tried to justify his judgment of giving maintenance on the basis of verse 241 of Quran. And I'm really sorry to say, but our judges are obsessed with religion. In spite of Professor Bhargav and mine and other people's interest in secularism, and I'm not saying our judges are not secular, but their religiosity will come in everywhere. Just take the example of euthanasia judgment. There also they are discussing what is death under this religion, what is death under that religion. And many a times they refer to scriptures. When you are deciding a case under the general law of the land, there is no need for you to at all go to any scripture. The precise point in Shah Bano was just this: whether Muhammad Ahmad was entitled to exception under 127. The exception he was claiming under 127 was that if an amount due under customary law has been paid on divorce, then the order of maintenance is to be modified under 125. He was saying that dower is that amount which I have paid to Shah Bano, payable on divorce, therefore my liability comes to an end. I entirely agree with Justice Chandrachud's decision on dower, that dower has nothing to do with divorce. It is a consideration of marriage. It is to be paid to the wife at the time of marriage as a mark of respect. I think he should have just stopped here, that dower is not the amount under Muslim personal law which is payable on divorce, and therefore your liability under 125 stays. Unnecessarily, he went into it. Now, coming to the law which was passed to overturn this decision, to which a mention and correct mention was made by Professor Bhargav. It has been written all over that this law was a huge appeasement of the Muslim minority. It was a great surrender by Rajiv Gandhi to Muslim ulama. There are, different kind of versions. Wajat Habibullah saying something, some people blaming MJ Akbar convincing him. I'm not going into that debate, but look at that this law was challenged in the Supreme Court by Daniel Latifi. And a Daniel Latifi judgment says what? That this law exactly does the same thing which Shah Bano has laid down. And that is why Supreme Court did not find this law as discriminatory, because the whole argument was made that this is a law which is applicable only for Muslim women. And therefore, this is a discrimination based on religion. And that's why the Supreme Court said, no, it is not a discrimination. It is absolutely constitutional. And I feel I will go a step ahead, that with this law, in fact, the liability has increased, because if you go by Code of Criminal Procedure, you have to make a monthly payment thing. Now, Supreme Court, interpreting this new law, has said that the liability of the entire life is to be paid within that period, and therefore the liability has become much greater. About banning of books, there is not one instance in Indian history. There are any number of instances in Indian history where books have been banned. Similarly, overturning of a Supreme Court judgment through Parliament. In 2005, I had calculated, by that time, 110 cases were there where Supreme Court gave some judgment and Parliament overturned it. If you look at in the recent past, look at the SC/ST atrocities judgment of 2nd April, where Justice Goel diluted SC/ST provision. Within months, Parliament sat and overturned it. It's a different story that subsequently the Supreme Court itself recalled its judgment. But there are any Vodafone, take any number of cases where a Supreme Court judgment has been reversed, but this was presented as appeasement of minorities. I take Professor Bhargav's point that in Indian secularism, consideration of minorities' right was very much on the minds of framers of the Constitution. But have we ever bothered to look at what are these minority rights? A reference is again and again made to Article 29 and Article 30. But what is 29? While the heading is saying protection of the interest of the minorities, if you look at the text, which is important, there is no word minority in Article 29. It says any section of Indian citizens having the distinct language, script, or culture of its own shall have the right to conserve the same. Therefore, it is the right of every single citizen. I refuse to accept Article 29 as a minority right special dispensation, which must be deleted from the Constitution. Come to Article 30. What does it talk of? It says minorities, whether based on religion or language, shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. Since all the states were carved out except this recent Telangana state, on the linguistic basis, each one of us can be a minority, a linguistic minority. A Brahmin of UP, if he goes and settles in Tamil Nadu and sets up a Hindi medium institution, it will be a minority institution. DAV College, an Arya Samaji Hindu college in Jalandhar, when Punjabi medium was imposed under the Punjab Act, was held as a minority institution. Again and again in last 1 year or so, I think more than 7-8 times, some BJP sponsored advocate went to the Supreme Court saying Hindus should be declared as a minority in 8 states. You don't need that order. TMA Pi is very clear from INRE Kerala Education Bill. Consistently, Supreme Court has said minorities are to be defined on the provincial level, and therefore anyone can be a religious minority and can also be linguistic minority. It is also the right of all citizens. But I want to test the argument with Professor Bhargav, assuming that it is a special dispensation for the minorities. So what? Is not the constitutional jurisprudence well settled on this, that there are times when equal rights, general rights are not enough for certain groups, and you need a spatial differentiation, a spatial dispensation. This whole argument of equality of religions, which has now been converted into a new kind of argument by the Hindutva, or what they call the positive secularism, that equality of religions be there. It's a formal understanding of equality, a dated idea of equality. The substantive idea of equality, very well recognized by Indian Supreme Court in number of cases now, recognizes that there can be disadvantaged groups, and their disadvantages are to be taken into account. And I believe if this is so, then even guaranteeing minority rights cannot be such a big deal. But in any case, if you go to Indian Constitution, I will say that Article 30 is no appeasement of minorities. I think the only two articles which are the most direct expression of secularism are Article 27 and 28. A reference was made to Article 28 by Professor Bhargav, and I would like to react it in a minute. But 27, that no religious tax will be there, and the proceeds of no tax shall be used for any specific religion. I think this is the most direct expression of secularism. There has been quite a bogey about Hajj subsidy. Yogi Adityanath government last year before, in its budget, provided subsidy for going to Mansarovar. There are subsidies given for all kinds of religious events. I had written a piece for Wire, how much Indian states really spends on religion. Meera Nanda has done a whole book on it, The God Market. But media has built up this argument, and Hindutva has built up this argument, that there is a huge, big appeasement of the minorities going on. And so much so that in spite of now BJP rule of 6 years, there is a TV channel who is saying there is a UPSC jihad. Now, if there is a UPSC jihad, the point which is being built up is the current government trying to appease minorities. Now, if that was their whole argument against Congress, and they are doing the very same thing, I think it is the majority which should be questioning them. And this TV channel is trying to present that the current government is doing the appeasement without looking at UPSC. I'm not going into the details of that, but on 28, where we are saying that there should not be religious instruction, I take the point of Professor Bhargav that there has to be a distinction between religious instruction and religious education, and religious education in terms of all religions, basic fundamental principles, is not constitutionally prohibited. But the whole point is, look at the government-sponsored central institutions. Year before last, for all 1,553 central schools, the central government issued a directive that there will be this prayer, which if you go by the US or the Canadian precedents, will definitely be held to be invoking the name of God. And somebody in UP, a headmaster, who was having this lappe aati hai dua ban ke tamanna meri, or where word Allah has come, that person was suspended. What the point I am trying to draw home, that I agree with Professor Bhargav that there has been a failure of secularism, but can we entirely blame secularists for it? Can we really say that because secularists sided with the minority rights, because secularists opposed reforms in personal laws, that story is not that simple. If you look at the reforms in Hindu law, it was vociferously opposed by RSS, was opposed by Hindutva. When original Hindu Code Bill was introduced, out of 27 speakers in Lok Sabha, as many as 24 opposed it. The President of the Republic said, I will refuse to sign it. The Law Minister Ambedkar had to resign it under pressure, under pressure. 2 years ago, we have seen the kind of protests we saw post Shah Banu. Of course, I am not justifying those protests. That is the whole point. When Supreme Court goes to religion, the fanatics hijacked by the Muslim fanatics and by the Muslim ulama. And I am not having any brief on their behalf. But that is what exactly happened. In Sabrimala, the position taken by Hindutva forces was that Supreme Court judgment is wrong. It should be reversed. But you have a favorable Supreme Court, which without being pointed out, single error apparent on the face of the record, which is the first condition to accept a review, accepted the review. Not only accepted the review, Justice Ranjan Gogoi led bench, it clubbed all the questions which were not before it, which were not, and that's why Justice Chandrachud and Justice Nariman had to write a powerful dissent. The point I'm trying to draw home is very simple, that leftist, secularist intellectuals were all for reforms. I remember my days when I was studying under Professor Irfan Habib. He was all for uniform civil code. But when uniform civil code project, from being a gender justice project, became a project of demeaning a minority community, then these people backtracked. And that's the point which I am trying to make, that we can't be entirely blaming intellectuals and giving as if the majority community or the government has not played any role in the failure of the secular project. Every single day, we observe appeasement of the majority taking place. But media is entirely under the control of the government. It is not written, and no protests happen. And if some protests happen, they are not given the prominence they deserve. Similarly, about citizenship, of course, the religious test is not there and should not be there. Even if tomorrow we become a Hindu Rashtra. In fact, Professor Bhargav will recall that I had written for Indian Express prior to this COVID-19 thing happened, that minorities too are fed up with secularism. I think I am now inclined to go public on this, that okay, remove secularism. Can you believe that when the new government came in and the law day of 26 November became a constitution day, the Attorney General in his speech in Supreme Court, then Attorney General Mr. Mukul Rohatgi, 3 times refers to preamble but does not refer to word secular. Rajnath Singh, as leader of the House in Rajya Sabha and then Home Minister, specifically said, oh, this word was not there in the Constitution, as if every other thing which was there, not there in the Constitution should not be there. All the other things of the 42nd Amendment are acceptable to us. Fundamental duties were also inserted by the 42nd Amendment. What integrity was also inserted by the 42nd Amendment. But we will emphasize fundamental duties at the cost of civil liberties and say, no, this intention of the framers of the Constitution was not there. True that K.T. Shah wanted it, but it was defeated. But this is also true that Kamath wanted God, invocation of God, that was also defeated. But that is neither here nor there, because even without word secular in the text of the Constitution, that will come in 76. In 73 itself, in Keshavananda Bharati, secularism was recognized as a basic structure of the Constitution. I entirely agree with Professor Bhargav that there has been too much of obsession of secularists with the wall of separation. And that obsession is wrong. And that is why, having been a strong secularist for decades, I started now teaching law and religion. And I feel that there has to be a kind of interaction between religion. So what he's saying, that there will be a principled distance as well as critique of religion when it comes to social norms. And I also take his point that the Muslim ulama, by confusing between Sharia and fiqh, have done a disservice. Sharia is something which refers to the relationship of man with God. No state would like to pass laws in respect of your relationship with God. But fiqh is analogical deductions. Fiqh deals with human relations. And for human relations, every state is well within its power to bring and initiate reforms. But in initiating reforms, if the project is that when triple divorce bill is passed, you have slogans of Jai Shri Ram in parliament, and Owaisi, at some other occasion going, I think, for oath, says Allahu Akbar. I think that is dangerous for Indian secularism. I feel if you look at the oath which ministers take, most of our ministers, rather than saying I solemnly affirm, take oath in the name of God. So let us accept, like United States, where constitutionally speaking, you have absolutely Jefferson wall of separation, but most of their presidents have been practicing Christians. We are not saying that public figures should not, follow their religious dictates, but there is an overdose of religiosity. I think the greatest problem, which has not been properly understood by us, that increasingly our religions are having this heavy dose of religiosity devoid of spirituality. There is no spirituality in our religions anymore. If we can bring in that spirituality, and look at what Professor Bhargav rightly said, reform within religions, the intra-reforms to which he is saying, maybe people of India can stand up. But with the kind of media we have, and with the kind of powerful state we have, I think it's better that we go for some kind of Hindu Rashtra. Let the Hindu fanatics be satisfied. Let them give their wish list. What kind of Hindu Rashtra they want? Is Pakistan and Saudi Arabia their model? Or they want to adopt the jurisdiction model of Great Britain or Greece or some of the European countries to which a reference was made by Professor Bhargav? If you have a Hindu Rashtra, are you going to say that only Hindus will be citizens of India and no Muslim or Christian will have any right of equal opportunity in public jobs? I don't think in 21st century any country, because even Pakistan does not have religious test in their citizenship act. So I am sure that once Hindu Rashtra becomes a reality, it will be more frustrating and disappointing for the proponents of Hindutva, and that will maybe trigger some kind of revival of secularism. Otherwise, whatever suggestions Professor Bhargav has said, that let us not be state-centric, let us look at our society, let intellectuals and people try to revive secularism. I think these are great ideas and probably the only ideas on which we can work. I think it was a huge learning experience for me. I'm in entire agreement with him that if we want to sustain ourselves as a society, or if Nehru is, such a condemned figure today, but he said any government's claim to civilization will be only in the context of a secular state, and a secular state will be what Professor Bhargav explained, that this is what the constitutional secularism all about. It is not irreligious, it is not anti-religion. Somebody asked the question about the atheist. Freedom of religion also means freedom from religions, and therefore Article 25 very much guarantees you that right. I only believe that if we want to be a modern progressive country, some kind of secularism must be revived and strengthened, because after all, secularism is the very core of the modernity, and any theocratic states cannot be said to be a very, very progressive state. Thank you very much.
Can I just very briefly respond to
Sure.
Professor?
Sure, of course.
So I just want to, I agree with a lot of things that he said, but there's one misunderstanding, possible misunderstanding, that I need to clarify. When I I never use the word minority appeasement. And I do not believe that if there are any minority rights, which I hitherto believed that there were in two of the articles in the Indian Constitution, but Professor Mustafa is a legal scholar. If he tells me that at least one of them doesn't, then I would go by what he's saying. But if there are any minority rights in the Constitution, these are not special dispensations. I entirely agree that the notion of equality has changed. I mean, I think I'm sure he's as much familiar with a distinction that has been there for a long time, but which has been made explicitly by Ronald Dworkin, which is the difference between treating people equally and treating people as equals. And treating people as equals sometimes requires differential treatment.
Right.
So for rights are given to minorities, whether they're linguistic or religious, anywhere, only because they're not able to get things which the majority routinely gets. These are not special. I never believed that these are privileges or special dispensations or anything. Having said that, I was saying that even then it is wrong for us. I mean, it's not wrong. Sometimes it's simply needed in our times, but to get permanently locked into a framework which talks about secularism only in terms of minority rights without addressing caste hierarchies and gender hierarchies, I think that is a problem because it disconnects the discourse and the politics of the defense of minorities, whether they're Muslims or Christians or wherever, with the discourse of Dalit emancipation and gender justice. I think these should be treated together because as in India, you know, the distinction, there is no church and there is no, even in, you know, Islam, except for, you know, Christians, I mean, there isn't really a church. There is hard to maintain the distinction between religion and social, religion and cultural. So we will never be able to change anything and transform anything unless we actually intervene in whatever it is that is subsumed under religion. So I think this is as important as addressing the issue of interreligious domination. Both are equally important and both should be seen together. That was my only point.
No,
I entirely...
I also agree. So the Constitution thought like this, that they had addressed the question of caste in Article 14, 15, 16, 17, and 335. That was their, the framers had this in mind. But I'm with you on this issue. But we have to look at what challenges were posed to secularism. So Hindus were depicted as victims. For instance, they say that Hindu temples' money, you know, is being used and Waqf money and Waqf people are having freedom. No, this is a myth. I think we will do a great service to the cause of secularism if we can try to really dispel these myths. You have as many as 27 Waqf acts so far, and all Waqf acts given equal, almost equal or greater state control in respect of religious properties of Muslims. Similarly, about all this Hindu religious and endowment acts, you know, because there were problems of corruption, and since temples have so many, you know, offerings and money, so they said that this is a secular function, and that's why we are bringing in administration. But I think in entire debate, we have not looked at what are the grievances of Hindutva. And these are their grievances, that being a Hindutva means, being a Hindu means that you don't have enough rights. I think we need to dispel this, that Hindus too have same rights. In fact, they have rights even under Article 30. And of course, Article 29 does not talk of minorities at all.